Everyone knows Jerry Garcia was the heart of the Grateful Dead, but in the fall of 1968, Garcia tried to fire two founding members of the band. Bob Weir and Ron Pigpen McKernan were out. Or at least, they were supposed to be. Here's the thing though, when Garcia looked back on it years later, he said something that perfectly captured the whole mess. It didn't take. We fired them, all right, but they just kept coming back. They kept coming back. And thank God they did, because what happened next was one of the strangest chapters in Grateful Dead history. A chapter that involved secret jam sessions under a fake band name, a 21-year-old guitarist falling face first into a muddy ditch, and the creation of some of the most legendary music the Dead ever made. This is the true story of what actually went down in 1968. By the summer of 1968, the Grateful Dead were at a crossroads. They'd started as a blues rock band. Pigpen was the frontman, belting out R&B covers and leading the crowd through marathon versions of Turn On Your Love Light. He was the guy people came to see, the charismatic bluesman who made the Warlocks, and then the early Dead, actually work. But Jerry Garcia and Phil Lesh had different ideas about where the music should go. They were getting into John Coltrane, modern jazz, free-form improvisation with interesting time signatures and complex rhythmic patterns. Songs like Dark Star and The 11 that could stretch for 20, 30 minutes without any vocals at all. Just pure exploration. And Bob Weir and Pigpen weren't keeping up. Weir was only 20 years old. He was still figuring out how to play guitar at the level Garcia and Lesh wanted. And Pigpen? He famously hated what he called endless psychedelic hogwash. He was a blues guy in a band that was moving away from the blues. Tom Constanten, who joined the band right around this time, put it bluntly later. He said that during the period of Mickey Hart and the Heartbeats, Phil and Jerry were into modern jazz improvisation, which is exactly what Weir and Pigpen were less into. So in August of 1968, during rehearsals for their next album at a studio in San Mateo, Garcia and Lesh made a decision. They were going to fire Bob Weir and Pigpen. The night everything changed. The exact details are fuzzy because nobody really wants to talk about it. But according to John McIntyre, one of the band's managers, there was a meeting. Garcia and Lesh told Weir he was out. They said the music was being held back by his playing, and they needed to move in a different direction. Bob Weir left that meeting devastated. It was actually his 21st birthday, October 16th, 1968. And instead of celebrating, he'd just been fired from the band he'd helped create when he was 16 years old. McIntyre tells the story of what happened next. He left the room where he was fired and hitched a ride. It had been raining. He stepped out and fell face down into a ditch in the mud. 21 years old, lying in a muddy ditch in the rain, fired from the Grateful Dead. But here's where the story gets weird. Nobody actually enforced the firing. Dennis McNally, the Dead's official historian, later wrote that no one had the heart to enforce the decision, and the two firees didn't seem to understand that they'd been fired. The band continued to gig as the full six-man band. Phil Lesh admitted this himself. He said, "Avoidance of confrontation is almost a religious point with us, so Weir kept showing up to gigs. And the rest of the band, being the Grateful Dead, didn't stop him. They just sort of let it happen." Pigpen's situation was even more complicated. He definitely knew something was wrong. Rock Scully, the band's manager, said, "I spent a lot of time with Pig through that period, because it was a number of weeks before he played with them again." What he did was he played the piano all day and all night. But Pigpen also had something else going on. His girlfriend, Veronica, was gravely ill in October of '68. She'd had a brain hemorrhage, or stroke, and Pigpen was spending enormous amounts of time at the hospital with her. So when he wasn't at shows, it wasn't just because he'd been fired. He was dealing with a personal crisis that nobody talks about. While Weir and Pigpen were in limbo, Mickey Hart had an idea. What if the core of the band, the guys who wanted to explore that modern jazz sound, just formed a separate group? They could play instrumental jams without worrying about vocals or song structure, or keeping things accessible. They called it Mickey and the Heartbeats, and in early October of 1968, they booked 3 nights at a tiny club in San Francisco called The Matrix. The shows were billed as Jerry Garcia and Friends to avoid contractual issues, since the Dead were also playing bigger shows at the Avalon Ballroom that same week. The Matrix had maybe 150 people capacity. It was cramped, sweaty, intimate. And on October 8, 1968, Garcia, Lesh, Hart, and drummer Bill Kreutzmann took the stage with some guests, including Jack Casady from Jefferson Airplane. Garcia joked with the crowd before they started. "Everybody sitting close, watch out for Mickey, because he spits frequently." Then they launched into a 20-minute instrumental jam on Clementine, a Dead song nobody had heard before or since. From there they went into the 11 and Death Don't Have No Mercy, playing everything without vocals. Just pure improvisation. Mickey Hart later said, "We just wanted to play instrumental music. We didn't want to play Grateful Dead music." But that's not really what happened. When you listen to the tapes from those Matrix shows, which were recorded on soundboard by the club owner, they're playing Dead songs. The other one, Dark Star. Even Love Light, Pigpen's signature tune, played as a weird instrumental without his vocals or organ. It was like a Grateful Dead rehearsal where two crucial members just didn't show up. The Heartbeats played about 6 shows total between October 8th and October 31st, and the music was incredible. Truly some of the most exploratory, intense jamming the Dead had done up to that point. On October 30th at the Matrix, they opened with a 20-minute Dark Star that flowed seamlessly into Death Letter Blues, a Sunhouse song that Garcia sang himself. It's the only time the Dead ever played that song live. On stage that night, Garcia told the crowd, "We're really here just goofing. We're just thrown together by fate, playing fate music." But while the Heartbeats were experimenting at the Matrix, the Grateful Dead proper still had shows to play. On October 12th and 13th, they were booked at the Avalon Ballroom. Weir was there, but Pigpen wasn't. Those are the only 2 Grateful Dead shows in 1968 where Pigpen was completely absent. And fans noticed. The set lists for both nights are nearly identical because they couldn't rotate in any of Pigpen's blues numbers. One fan later wrote, "Pigpen is missed. However, the guys make up for his absence with some fantastic playing. In fact, these are some of the heaviest and headiest jams of the year." The October 12th Dark Star is still legendary among Deadheads. 53 upvotes on headyversion.com, with fans calling it haunted, moody, and purely cosmic. But listening back to all those recordings, something becomes clear. The jams were amazing, but something was missing. One blogger who analyzed the tapes later wrote, "It's ironic to hear them trying out The Other One or Love Light without Weir or Pigpen. It's like listening to a Dead practice session where Weir hasn't shown up." Even Phil Lesh, who supposedly wanted this experiment, wasn't fully on board. He later admitted, "I only came out a couple times to play with the Heartbeats. The music didn't feel right to me." The experiment had revealed something important. The Dead weren't just Garcia and Lesh. They needed all the pieces. Bob Weir didn't just sit around feeling sorry for himself. He later said, "It wasn't the best time of my life. I kept working on guitar and singing." He moved into Bill Kreutzmann's garage and practiced obsessively. He worked on his rhythm guitar technique, studied jazz voicings, tried to figure out how to play the complex parts Garcia and Lesh wanted. And Pigpen did the same thing. Friends taught him how to use the foot pedals on the Hammond organ properly, how to expand his chord vocabulary, how to contribute more to the instrumental jams even if they weren't his thing. Rock Scully later explained what the whole point had been. Garcia knew what he was doing. He was just scaring their asses, rattling their cages. They took a couple of weeks off. Weir went and got some more electric guitar training. Pigpen got some help from friends and learned how to play the foot pedals on the organ and expand his knowledge. By mid-October, the experiment was over. On October 20th, 1968, the Dead played a short set at the Greek Theater in Berkeley, and Pigpen was back, leading 3 big songs, including a massive Turn On Your Love Light. It was his triumphant return. Jerry Garcia once said about Pigpen, "He was the only guy in the band who had any talent when we were starting out. He was genuinely talented. Pigpen is what made the band work." And about Weir? Even though Bob was young and still learning, his rhythm guitar style was unlike anything else. He was developing a completely unique approach, playing counter rhythms and jazz chords that eventually became essential to the Dead's sound. The solution wasn't to fire people, it was to add someone. In late November of 1968, Tom Constanten officially joined the Grateful Dead as a second keyboardist. He was Phil's old friend from music school, fresh out of the Air Force, and crucially, he could play the complex organ parts on Dark Star and the 11 that Pigpen never wanted to play anyway. Now they had 7 members. Pigpen could focus on what he did best: singing, playing blues organ, and commanding the stage. And TC could handle the avant-garde stuff. The band was whole again, and they were better than ever. All those Heartbeats jams, all that experimentation in October at the Matrix, it hadn't been for nothing. They'd refined Dark Star through dozens of hours of practice. They'd figured out how to do seamless transitions between songs. They'd pushed their improvisational skills to new levels. And in January and February of 1969, they recorded a series of live shows that became the album Live Dead. That album, released in November of '69, is still considered one of the greatest live albums ever made. The 23-minute Dark Star from February 27th, St. Stephen flowing into the 11, the cosmic improvisation they'd been working toward all through that chaotic fall of '68. Bob Weir was on every track, his rhythm guitar woven through everything, more confident and skilled than he'd ever been. And while Pigpen doesn't feature heavily on the main Live Dead suite, he was there for the marathon Love Light that closed out their shows, leading the crowd through 30-minute rave-ups that left everyone exhausted. They'd tried to fire him, they'd tried to fire Bob, and instead, they ended up with one of the greatest lineups in rock history. The 1968 firing incident is barely mentioned in most Grateful Dead documentaries, but Deadheads know about it, and it reveals something fundamental about how the band worked. They didn't fire people and move on, let things get messy, argued through their music instead of through words, and eventually figured out how to make it work with everyone's strengths and weaknesses intact. One fan on Reddit later reflected on the whole episode. I find it interesting that Jerry and Phil felt Pig was holding the band back, but after Pig died, the band settled into the long-haul '70s lineup. Be careful what you wish for, I guess. Bob Weir later joked about the whole thing with characteristic humor. Jerry and Phil thought we were holding things back, so they played without us for a couple of months. We were the junior musicians in the band. But the thing is, they weren't holding anything back. They were the Grateful Dead, all of them, together. The magic wasn't in having the most technically skilled musicians playing the most complex music. It was in having this specific group of people, with all their contradictions and conflicts and different visions, creating something none of them could make alone. That fall in 1968, when everything almost fell apart, when Bob was lying in a muddy ditch, and Pigpen was at the hospital, and Jerry was playing Fate music at the Matrix with a fake band name, they learned what they'd suspected all along. Garcia was right when he said it didn't take. You can't fire family, even when you try.